Hello, welcome back to Unit 7 of Dr. Izad's Language Arts class. As we should have now wrapped up the Joy Luck Club LAT, we are now moving on to the assignment entitled Joy Luck Club Project. Remember that all the projects and assignments that I give are related and are designed to follow from and build off of one another. As such, it is important to revisit what we have done in the previous assignment, the Joy Luck Club LAT. In this assignment, we analyzed how Amy Tan's use of parables, which are stories that teach a lesson, create mystery, tension, or surprise in the main narrative. Keep in mind that the parables that Amy Tan begins her stories with are separate from the narratives that involve the main characters of the Joy Luck Club. It would be like beginning a story that I made up with the parable of the little boy who cried wolf. If I did this, I would essentially be using the story as a way to frame my own narrative, or get the reader to anticipate some of the topics and themes that would be in my own story. So if I did this, the reader might guess that my story is about someone who is a compulsive liar, or that I will be telling a story in which the theme is don't lie. Additionally, you might guess that my narrative will parallel that narrative presented in the parable somehow. This is why I wanted all of you to read the parables first before reading any other parts of the novel. In any case, had we done that, we might have guessed that the characters in the Joy Luck Club would have had narratives that involved themes or conflicts that unfold in ways similar to those found in the parable Feathers from a Thousand Li Away. In this parable, a Chinese woman is emigrating to America to give her daughter a better life. She comes to America with a treasured item, a duck that had transformed itself into a swan, and the woman had hoped to give this to her daughter so that her daughter would understand her mother's hopes for her in relocating to America. Just as the duck became more than it ever hoped to be, in America, her daughter would be more than she could have ever hoped to be back in the motherland. However, upon arriving on American soil, the bird was taken away from the mother, and she was left with only a feather. The mother still intended to give what was left of the swan to her daughter, as it was symbolic of the mother's good intentions, but dared not do so until she would learn to speak perfect American English. She wanted to tell her daughter about the feather's significance in a language her daughter, who had been raised in America, could understand. She feared that if she could not tell her in perfect American English, her daughter would not understand the importance of the feather and would dismiss it. So there are a number of topics, themes, and conflicts that we could have predicted would have been present in the main narrative. We might have predicted that the conflict could have involved misunderstandings between American-born daughters and foreign-born mothers. We might have predicted that surpassing one's own limitations and achieving greatness, much like the duck achieved greatness by becoming a swan, would have been topics to which the conflict pertained. And the fact that we could predict those things would have created mystery or tension or surprise or all three of those effects while reading any part of the main narrative. And if you had taken my suggestion in the video that I made about how to complete the body paragraph of the LAT, you would have analyzed how knowledge of this parable creates mystery or tension or surprise in the section of the novel entitled Two Kinds. In this part of the novel, Jing Mei's mother pushes her to become a child prodigy, a figurative swan, so to speak. See how all of Suyan's attempts to push her daughter to discover her gifts plays out in this clip from the Joy Luck Club film, which portrays the conclusion of that section of the novel. Once you have watched the clip, which essentially follows the novel, consider this question. How might the reader, knowing what they know about the parable, have felt a sense of mystery or tension or surprise when reading this excerpt?
Until that night, I didn't believe I was a prodigy. In fact, I used to go out of my way to prove my mother wrong, that I wasn't cut out to be the best anything. I could only be me. It was incredible. It was like my hands were possessed by Mozart. And everybody could see this, could hear this. I was a genius. I had been discovered. And then I heard it. didn't notice.
Bravo! Bravo! Encore! Well done!
In response to that question, you could have said any number of things. One student, to whom I will only refer as ES, said that reading up to this point in the novel would have created mystery because the reader expects Jing Mei to become a figurative swan, perhaps by discovering her talents. As you clearly saw, however, Jing Mei completely botched the recital. As such, mystery is created because the reader is left to wonder when and if Jing Mei's character arc will follow that of the ducks with her finally discovering her true hidden talents. Alternatively, you could have said that this part creates tension because the reader knows that communication barriers is a topic that is explored throughout the novel. They could have drawn this conclusion from the fact that the mother in the parable feared that she would never be able to accurately convey the importance of the feather due to a language barrier. A sense of tension is created between Jing Mei and Suyan here, because Jing Mei indicates that she may have, at least on a subconscious level, sabotaged her recital on purpose because she resented the fact that her mother was always pushing her to be something that she wasn't. Yet, from the parable, the reader may think this resentment is uncalled for because Suyan's intentions, like the mother in the parable, were good and pure. Though the reader knows this, Jing Mei does not, and that creates a sense of tension. However you chose to answer this, our responses should have concluded with, among other things, a statement about the significance of the topic. The significance of the topics discussed in the response could have had to do with how this tension created in the novel reflected the cultural experiences of Chinese mothers and their Chinese American daughters. For instance, one student, to whom I will only refer as Lucky, stated that the tension created reflected the dynamic between Chinese mothers and their Chinese American daughters because Chinese mothers are typically very strict and stringent with their daughters. Thus, the relationship between Chinese mothers and their Chinese American daughters can be characterized by a sort of tension that is created from the strict nature of the mother's child rearing. Now, this is simply interpretation. I am not saying that this is objectively true, but it is a good interpretation provided by a student. Now, at the end of the last video, I had said that you can build on your own conclusions that you made in the LAT for this project. Let's take a look at the prompt to see how that is possible. This prompt begins by telling us that Amy Tan begins each section of the novel with a parable, and if you'll remember from one of the early videos I made entitled Distance Learning, Introduction to Unit 7, the Joy Luck Club, Homework and Introductory Activity, this stylistic technique is part of Amy Tan's voice. If you don't remember what voice is in literature, please reference that video once more. Moving on, this prompt is asking us to critique this aspect of her use of voice, and when we critique things, we may be commenting on their efficacy. In other words, how effective they are with respect to a desired result. The desired result, in the case of a nonfiction text, would be the author's purpose. With that said, take the time to pause this video and leave a comment in response to the weekly discussion topic for your weekly participation. How would you describe what is being asked of you for this project? And how will you approach responding to this project's prompt? Again, no going forward in the video and simply typing my reiteration of it. I want to know your understanding of the task with which we are assigned. Essentially, we are determining whether or not Amy Tan's choice to begin different parts of her novel with a parable were effective, considering her purpose for writing. We may very well have interpreted her purpose of writing in the concluding paragraph of our LATs. Perhaps she just wanted to inform us of the nature of the relationship between Chinese mothers and their American-born daughters. Perhaps she wanted to make the reader empathize with the plight of Chinese-American daughters and the unrealistic expectations of their mothers. Considering any of these possible purposes for Amy Tan telling the story, we want to determine how effective her use of voice in beginning each section of her novel with a parable was, in terms of fulfilling that intended purpose. How might the use of parables have been effective in getting the reader to empathize with Chinese American daughters of Chinese-born mothers? How might it have been ineffective in realizing that purpose? How might it have been effective in informing us of the nature of the relationships between Chinese mothers and their Chinese American daughters? How might it have been ineffective? Of course, these two things might not have definitively been her purpose. You may have identified a different purpose for her writing the story through your own reading. So here's our starting point. What do you think? What is Amy Tan's purpose for writing the Joy Luck Club, and how does her use of voice help or hinder her in realizing this purpose? Feel free to leave a response to that in the class comments in response to the weekly discussion topic for your weekly participation as well. Also, as this is a project, multimedia options are recommended. As such, you can choose either of the suggestions presented in the prompt, and if there is another creative way that you would like to address this prompt, please let me know, and we can figure something out.